Today we're doing a new series for Braver Angels Sacramento. We're going to be having a discussion of two people talking about a current topic and getting their thoughts, their opinions for general audience consumption. And we hope that this could potentially foster more discussion going forward in the future. My name is Erik. I'm a retired software engineer from the Silicon Valley, a transplant here to the Sacramento area. And my political leanings, generally speaking, run a little bit to the left, but I hope that I come off as a moderate in most ways and maybe more purple than anything else. But you might have a different opinion after watching this video. We'll find that out for sure. My associate today, my battle royale partner, let's say, is Tab Berg. Tab, why don't you go ahead and introduce yourself?
My name is Tab. I'm a definite bright red. Conservative, unapologetically so. I'm in the Sacramento area. We've been here for about 25 years, and I've been involved with Better Angels for a couple years now.
Fantastic. Thanks, Tab. And your job title is what again?
I am a freelance political consultant.
Very nice. Okay. So today's topic is the impeachment, the second impeachment of Donald Trump. Now, we should say that as of the date that we're recording this, which is January 28th, we haven't had the trial yet. Donald Trump has been impeached by the House of Representatives, and the trial will start about May 8th or 9th, or excuse me, February 8th or February 9th. I'm not sure which date. And so we're talking, in this middle space between those two things. And I do want to mention that, for myself, a lot of people see the term of impeachment as sort of the same thing as a conviction. They're really not. So I may use the term impeachment incorrectly at times. What I mean is that Donald Trump has been impeached already, and there is a trial that would take place, and he could face a conviction at that trial, but that has not happened yet. So if I use the term impeachment in a future sense, I'm really just talking about the trial part. So I'd like to kick off our discussion today, making mention of how difficult, or not difficult, but how complex of a topic this is. I will say that I believe that whatever happens for the trial, it's going to be very partisan in my view. I think that the vote will come down along party lines in the Senate. And so, if I talk about, should we go forward with impeachment, or what will happen, if we go forward with the trial, and if there is, any of the trial, I'm talking about what I would like to see. I don't actually believe at this time, right now, today, that there will be an actual conviction that will occur. So I don't know, Tab, do you want to weigh in on that a little bit?
Yeah, I mean, I think you're kind of right that it's very much a partisan thing. This has nothing to do with jurisprudence or assigning accountability or blame. This is political theater, in my view, which is why I oppose it. I mean, I oppose moving forward with this. The purpose of impeachment is to remove somebody from office, and the voters have already done that. So to me, this is just another way to escalate conflict between Republicans and Democrats that serves no value whatsoever.
I'm on board with a lot of what you're saying. I do think, if I try to read the tea leaves of what the Democrats are attempting, I believe that it's to have a trial, right? That I don't think the Democrats feel like they will get a conviction. Again, this is just my personal opinion, but they want to have a trial. They want to put Donald Trump on trial. They want to see what kind of defense would be mounted for Donald Trump. And so it is theatrical in that way. We know the outcome. So the more important thing to Democrats is the spectacle that, may take place. And so in that sense, I think you and I probably agree. I don't necessarily agree with we shouldn't be doing it at all. And we'll get into more of that, I think, as we go along. Do you have any other points to make before we get into some
Yeah, I mean, I think
topics?
the House kind of set the tone in terms of typically when the House does an impeachment, they present facts from both sides and give the House of Representative members information, and because they failed to do any of that, that it really was just an instantaneous. I mean, even the Richard Nixon impeachment, it took weeks and weeks and weeks, and there was a presentation of facts on both sides. That it is purely partisan, and I think there are things that the country needs to focus on right now, and there are things that we need to come together on right now. That this is just, to me, an unconscionable waste of congressional time, a distraction, as well as a division, when we really need to have the opposite. We need to be focused on some of these crises that we're facing, and we need to be coming together to resolve them. And there are so many issues out there that there is not a partisan divide on, like infrastructure repairs. I mean, we have, for the first world country, we have almost a third world airport system where we could come together on that and drive those through. California, just from a federal highway standpoint, almost 1,300 roads and bridges are at a state that's considered dangerously deteriorated. We need to be focused on those issues. In California, using federal money for unemployment and other we're now seeing a $30 billion fraud scheme, including people in prison who've been in prison for life collecting unemployment. I just think there are so many issues that we should focus on, that this feels to me petty revenge. It feels like revenge more than anything else. We just want to punish this guy because we don't like him.
Okay. Let's come back to the unity thing or the punishment thing, I think toward the end, if you don't mind. The first topic I really want to dive into here is this constitutionality of what's happening, right? Is it constitutional that, we're going to impeach and have a trial for a president who's no longer a sitting president, right? He's left office. Give me your ideas about that.
Well, I know what they've talked about is having two separate votes, a vote on impeachment and a vote to bar him from holding future office. And both of those are constitutionally permissible for a sitting person, for somebody currently in office. But the Constitution is pretty clear on what the purpose of impeachment is to remove someone from official office and then to bar him from holding future office. So, I mean, lawyers are going to get rich arguing this. But from a pretty practical standpoint, I don't see that it has any constitutional, that it's very constitutionally supported from, if you read the Federalist Papers, which are frequently utilized in Supreme Court decisions in determining constitutionality. There's no literature in there that says, no example in there where somebody who has already left office would be brought to trial and convicted and removed from office when he's already out of office. So I think from a constitutional standpoint and a common sense standpoint, it doesn't make a lot of sense.
Okay. I agree with, well, I'm not sure, I don't agree with you, let's put it that way, because I've read expert opinions on both sides and there just doesn't seem to be a lot of agreement. So my position is, I think that we need to figure out a way to know whether it's constitutional or not, to have a fine definition of it. If you came to me today and said, well, the Supreme Court just ruled that it's unconstitutional, then okay, great, that sounds good to me. But without having that ruling, to not know for certain, I think that it should proceed. And I don't know, typically what would happen, I think, in a lot of criminal cases would be that you would have the case, and then if there were certain appeals that should happen afterward, then that would happen. And it would go through the appellate courts, and in certain cases, it would go all the way to Supreme Court. And so I don't know whether this would fall into that same, stream of judicial action, but it seems like it should to me. So I feel like we should have the trial, have whatever verdict comes out of it. If Donald Trump is found guilty, and he would have an appeals process. I'm not saying I know that it works that way, but it seems like that would be one way to resolve this, is he could appeal it to the Supreme Court, and the Supreme Court could rule, no, his constitutional rights were violated.
Unfortunately, the process of impeachment does not fall under the jurisdiction of the Supreme Court. So he could not, there is no appeal of impeachment.
The Supreme Court has ruled on impeachment in the past. I think there were several things about impeachment that they've ruled about. Is that not true?
Not if you do a plain text reading of the Constitution. There is no appeal process of an impeachment, and previous impeachments have not resulted in any kind of judicial review, at least none of the literature that I've read through. So,
I'm not right. So I should clarify. I'm not talking about the result of an impeachment. I'm talking about the impeachment process itself. I think the Supreme Court had ruled on parts of the process that were constitutional or not constitutional.
Yeah, I mean, that may be, I looked at the only thing I ever looked at was the constitutionality of challenging an impeachment, and no impeachment process there is no appeals process for it. Therefore, there's no judicial review.
Okay.
And my big concern is whether we should be doing it or not from a practical standpoint, as well as from a legal standpoint. I do agree that we should have some clarity, but I understand, I mean, and Chuck Schumer has certainly made it clear one of their goals was to prevent him from ever running for office in the future. And to me, that's a terrifying prospect. Are we going to start a new round of weaponizing impeachment just to say, oh, well, I don't want that guy to ever run for office, so, you know, let's remove, you know, and it only applies, impeachment only applies to federal officers. So if you're a judge or somebody else and they say, hey, that's a judge we don't want to have, you know, who might run for president someday, let's go through an impeachment process so we can prohibit him from ever running. I don't like the idea of our society, of our legal process, our electoral process going through and saying, we don't want that person to run, that person to run, or that person to run. So let's abuse or let's weaponize impeachment to keep those people out of the possibility of running. I mean, we have voters for that purpose. Voters get to decide who gets to be elected and not a group of political people. And you know, the comparisons to indictment, a criminal indictment, and you know, impeachment is for, you know, crimes and misdemeanors, high crimes and misdemeanors. There's a process where an impartial jury, a grand jury, determines whether or not there's sufficient evidence to move that forward. That process never happened here, and there is no impartial Congress. I mean, Congress, you know, particularly this day and age, is not impartial at all. They're enormously partisan, and they're, you know, if this whole thing is just setting up a Chuck Schumer chit bargaining point for reorganization of the Senate, that's a terrible precedent in my view. We're abusing the process, a judicial process, a judgment process, in order to give internal political partisan negotiating points. That would be, I mean, if that ends up being the case, it'll be even more appalling than what's going on right now.
I think that, I mean, yeah, I love the term weaponize, you know, this process of impeachment. You know, there are two parts to impeachment, right? One is removal from office, and the one is preventing from being in office again. I think the first one is by far the more dangerous one. If your political party, you know, has a simple majority in the House and a 2/3 majority in the Senate, you can remove a president you can just remove them. Apparently at this time, this seems, you can just find whatever nitpicky thing you want to charge him with. You probably wouldn't even need to do that, really. And so I do think that the partisanship has brought us to the brink of this reality that could happen, that, you know, we could see a president be impeached for minor offenses simply because the ruling party doesn't like something about them, or, you know, would rather see the vice president be president, something along those lines. I think that you and I would probably agree that if the Democrats had a 2/3 majority in the Senate, he would be impeached or tried and convicted, and otherwise he wouldn't be. And that, you know, just that alone doesn't make any sense to me. I think that this won't happen, but we probably need to rethink this whole impeachment process.
I mean, it should be clearer, because and if you read a little bit of the history of it, there was a lot of debate on particularly what is the meaning of high crimes and misdemeanors. Is it lying? Well, if you watch an hour of C-SPAN of debate on the floor of Congress, you just watched an hour of people telling lies. I
Sure.
mean, exaggerations. And so, does that really reach that level? I mean, there's a lot of talk about, well, he incited a riot. Now, I didn't watch his speech or see a video of his speech, but I read it after the fact.
Mhm.
And I can't find a line in there where he says anything that to me indicates, I want you to go there and create problems. I mean, he even said, quote, "I know that everyone here will soon be marching to the Capitol building to peacefully and patriotically make your voices heard." I don't see how that's incite. I mean, and I've had this discussion with other people. I absolutely believe that everybody who breached the Capitol should be prosecuted to the fullest extent of the law, and those who injured and actually murdered other people, I mean, absolutely need to be prosecuted. They need to be absolutely held accountable. But I don't want to give those people who did bad things an out, saying, "Oh well, I only did it because Trump told me to." Well, I can't find anything in his speech that's told them to go do anything remotely like that. And he was very specific about peacefully and patriotically make your voices heard. So I don't think there was even something indictable from the House's perspective. I think the House made a huge partisan mistake based on their just personal dislike of this president, or a political machination in order to set themselves up for some kind of a Senate negotiation. And those are terrible reasons to start removing people from office if we were months in the past. And certainly there's no justification for removing somebody from office who's already out of office.
Okay. So it's right. So as far as the trial itself, and if I believe that there is evidence to say that he incited the riot, I'll totally say that he never came anywhere close to saying, you as a crowd should go to the Capitol, bust through the police lines, find Nancy Pelosi and do terrible things to her. Of course, he never said any of those things. But incitement of riot, I tried to look for laws that cover this, and I had a difficult time. But it's almost like racketeering in a sense, where the crime boss doesn't need to say certain things; people just do things on their behalf. The thing that you might see in a movie or on a television show would be someone coming into a store and saying, "It's a beautiful store you got in here. It'd be a shame if something happened to it." There's no overt threat made, but there's more of an implicit threat made. And we could review more of his speech. He used terms like "you need to go down there and fight" and things like that. We could look at those things. I'm sure that will be covered ad nauseum during the trial. To me, that's part of the evidence against him. Another part of the evidence is these many interviews that we've seen post riot with many of the rioters who said, "I was doing what the president told me to do." Um, we would have to explore sort of their mindset more. And just because somebody says someone told me to do it doesn't necessarily mean that, you can say that they incited a riot. But I think if you put it all together, in my mind, I do think that there is probably enough evidence to say that he did incite the riot.
I mean, this to me kind of falls under the whole Twinkie defense. The devil made me do it. Affluenza. The factors in my life, and then something triggered me. And I don't give the people who committed these heinous acts that excuse. I don't accept that excuse from anybody. If you did something wrong, you did something wrong. I think even if he had encouraged people to go to the Capitol and force your way in, it still doesn't give these people an excuse. But I can't find a single line in there. And when he says "fight, fight, fight," I mean, I can pull up quotes from every single person who's ever run for public office who said the same thing. So I have a harder time buying that. That the context is that he, wink, wink, be peaceful, wink, wink. I didn't find. Now, I didn't watch the speech, so I don't know. I mean, it could have been, there might be some body language there that I haven't seen, but I couldn't find anything in the written speech or the transcript of the speech that gave me any, that I would, and I think any reasonable person would take as an incitement to go do something wrong. And I think reasonable person test is what needs to be applied here, because I personally think all those people that breached it are a little bit unbalanced.
Okay. I would probably go along with you there. Again, I would say it's not a clear-cut thing. It would be fantastic if we could say find 12 impartial jurors to come in and present this evidence, and if they said we don't think it amounts to an incitement, I would say, okay, that sounds great. I think that you're right. Excuse me, not that you're right, but I will accept your decision. And to that degree, you know, I could see 6 people seeing it one way and 6 people seeing it another. And so ultimately, maybe it wouldn't come down to a conviction. But in my view, I take your point well, which is that this language is used all the time. You have to fight to keep your country. And that's very patriotic and a nice thing to say. But what was said was you have to fight to keep your country. And then all that the mob went down to the Capitol and stormed it, right? And so it highlights those words more. Maybe we are taking them out of the wrong context because of the action that took place after it. Whereas most of the time, if you say you got to go and fight and people don't punch a police officer and kill them or whatever, then we don't take it to that level of, well, you know, simply was no riot, so it didn't incite to that level. It's a very fine line, I think, for me.
And I would 100% agree with that, because we're in a time when maybe we need to all be a little more judicious in our comments, because they can be taken wrong. And I certainly think that there's there are things that you can faults that you can put on Trump since the election, and the way he's presented his case. But when I look back at each election in the past, when there was a long-standing, you know, Trump was not legitimately elected. It was a Russian plan. Back when George Bush got elected, the first time, you know, many people within the Democratic Party said he was not legitimately elected. So Trump doing the same thing, and that period between election and electors, filing lawsuits, demanding recount, that's part of the process. It's always been part of the process.
Right.
And so for them to say that demonstrates that he didn't accept the results of the election, when, I mean, the reality is he cleaned out. He left the White House. He left the letter. You know, he to the point, you know, he now has an office of the former president. He's clearly accepted, you know, and that's what they're basing the sedition claim on, is that he was trying to do a coup to overthrow the government. But there is no evidence that he was doing that. You know, in fact, exculpatory evidence to the contrary. So I feel like this is mostly a political move. They're trying to split the Republican Party. They're trying to, apparently they're afraid that he might run again, so they want to make sure that there's a ban on him. And I just don't think any of those are appropriate ways, you know, especially when, you know, we've seen this escalation of not my president. You know, they did it to George Bush, so Republicans did it to Barack Obama, so Democrats did it to Donald Trump. And I don't want to see, you know, I was one of the very first Republican media personalities to ever say, you know, hey, Joe Biden is my president. You know, I've said it on the news. I've said it on Twitter. You know, that doesn't mean I'm going to agree with him. And that doesn't mean I'm not going to criticize programs or policies that he's pursuing, but he is my president. And I don't want us to escalate that sort of non-acceptance and illegitimizing elections to continue to escalate, because it just keeps getting worse and worse and worse, to the point where bad things, really bad things.
Really bad things. I totally agree. Let me reframe the question for you. Let's say that what happened didn't come from the president. Let's say that Rudy Giuliani, who also spoke and talked about doing some bad things. Do you think that there, you know, so setting aside the president, would you think that those things that were said would amount to an indictment, not a conviction, but moving forward to a trial based on what you've heard? Do you think there's enough to indict someone to have a trial?
Rudy Giuliani's comments were very different than the president's.
Sure. No,
I mean,
right.
he actually
I totally
said
agree.
trial by combat.
Right.
That I think was way over the line. But rhetoric over the line, to me, not sure how far you should be able to take that, because I can find, 24, Maxine Waters saying, "Get in their face, surround them." Heck, I mean, she was calling for violence, and I'm not. I don't believe we should go prosecute her. Um, the people who commit violence, I think, should be held accountable for the violence they commit. But unless there's something really much more explicit in organizing, facilitating, and promoting violence, that we should be removing people from office or barring them for running for office just because their rhetoric is a little bit heated.
Okay. Let's move on a little bit. So one of the, we've mentioned it here already, but I want to come back to it, which is the penalty for being convicted is 1, removal from office, and 2, which is a separate thing, which was voted on again, is the, being barred from holding office. And I've heard some people say, and it may have been you and it may have been someone else, you can correct me about this, that let the people decide. Why have the Senate vote and bar someone from office? Let the people decide about whether he can run for office again or not. Correct me if I'm wrong about that. That is your idea.
Well, my understanding is that you have to be convicted of the impeachment offense and removed from office before the second vote can take place.
Correct.
And so we're now dealing with a hypothetical, because 45 Republicans have already come forward saying this process is unconstitutional. We're not going to vote for it. So the vote has already been determined. Sure. There's not going to be an impeachment.
It's not going to happen.
So the hypothetical next one, I'm a little more iffy on playing on hypotheticals, but
okay.
I don't like the idea of this. I mean, we've had convicted felons in the Senate. If they want to create a rule about who can serve in the Senate, that's one thing. But for them to go to other offices and say, we're going to bar you and you and you, Erik, you can't run for office because I don't like you. So let's have a vote. Okay, we all voted. All right, Erik can't run for office. I don't like that as a process for anyone. I mean, I don't think it serves the republic well. I don't think it serves the public well, and I don't think it serves our idea of civility and collegiality very well.
Okay, thanks. I was going into this talk thinking, well, there's a lot of reasons, not a lot, but there's a few reasons that qualify the president, right? You have to be a certain age in order to run for the presidency. You can't run for more than 2 terms, you can't serve more than 2 terms in office. So all of these things disqualify you if you're too young, if you've been president too many times, and having to do with how long you've lived in this country and stuff like that. So we have these bars by which you have to pass in order to become president. And it might seem reasonable to say one of the bars is that you weren't impeached in the past, right? But I like your explanation of it, which is that these other things that have happened weren't done by someone to you, right? If you're too young, that means you're too young. It's not a decision that someone made. Whereas what you're saying, which I totally agree with, I think, which you changed my mind about, which is that other people made a decision that you shouldn't be able to do this, versus it's just you didn't qualify under some guideline or something like that. And in that sense, I think there is a distinction there to be made.
I agree. I mean, I think I have and this is weird for somebody who works in politics, because everyone always talks about how politics treats everybody dumb. My view of politics is that the voters are extraordinarily smart as a collective, and that they generally arrive at this. And if you've never read The Wisdom of Crowds, I'd strongly recommend reading it. It gives example after example after example of the voters kind of overturning what the insiders thought was the appropriate action, and arriving at a much better solution. And in giving historical perspective, looking back on them, we found, wow, if we'd have done what the elite wanted to do, what the legislators wanted to do, we'd have really been in a bad way. So I have a lot of faith in voters, and I believe that voters generally arrive at the right decision. And I would rather have them make that choice than a group of 60 senators.
Okay, that's fair, I think. So the last topic, and you can certainly bring up more topics after this, but the last topic I want to talk about was to circle back to the unity question, whether it's a good idea to be pursuing this at this time at all. I agree with some of the things that you said already, which is that it's a distraction from getting positive things done. But I keep coming back in my mind, so maybe you'll change my mind about this, but I keep coming back to the idea that in my mind, a crime has occurred, and to let someone go, for that crime that has happened doesn't seem to be right to me. Maybe the president, maybe you could say it's unconstitutional, and for me, that's sort of a technicality. Like if we said, well, if the president commits the crime so close to the end of his term that he actually goes out of office, then he gets off on a technicality that he's technically not the president anymore, or he could resign and he would no longer be president. I think a crime has been done here, and I think it sets a bad precedence that a president, could do something like this in the future and feel like, well, I could get off on a technicality, or I could claim that it's distracting to the country to have these things go on and things like that. So I do agree that it's distracting, but I don't know that there's going to be a lot of unity created by not going after this versus going after it. I don't think it changes the unity equation at all in my mind.
Well, I mean, so Richard Nixon, I think it was pretty clear, participated in a crime. Whether it rose to high crimes and misdemeanors was the only question. And he resigned, and that ended the impeachment process. So historically, that has been the case. In the Trump one, I think there's a lot of a discrepancy or disagreement on whether a crime was committed by Trump or not. I can't find anything in his speech that leads me to believe he was encouraging people to storm the Capitol. So I'm not sure that I agree that there's a crime committed that somebody needs to be held accountable for, because the people who actually did it are being prosecuted. So the people who committed the crime aren't getting away with it. And in fact, I think you have to create some pretty nebulous connections to take that speech to those actions. It gives them an excuse for their actions, and I don't excuse their actions one bit. I want them prosecuted. I want the people who participated in killing the police officer to go to prison for life. The District of Columbia does not allow the death penalty. Otherwise, I would support them facing that. But so I don't agree that there is a crime. I would agree if there was a crime that they probably should pursue. But we didn't get that opportunity of it through the House of Representatives because they never really discussed it. They never laid out the speech and said, these are the things. It's a more nebulous thing is like, oh, he continued to dispute the election results. Therefore, when he said, keep disputing it, Hillary Clinton never accepted her loss, ever. She said it was a fraud.
Right.
And there have been violent activities after that. In fact, there were tons of violence on Inauguration Day when Trump ran. There were huge. There was a call by Madonna to bomb the White House. So if there was a consistency of prosecution for those kinds of things, I might be a little more amenable to it. But as it is, I don't see that a crime was committed, and I definitely don't think that it contributes to unity. Whether or not we can get past that is really up to a lot of us. It's up to the citizens. Don't look to politicians to drive unity, because they're the ones who are benefiting from disunity. So I think it's up to the citizens to move the unity equation forward, not the politicians.
Okay. I agree with you that it's up to the citizens to move unity forward, but we focus so highly, or the media does anyway, focus so highly on statements from politicians as opposed to other people. And they often use that to say, this is what the country is feeling. If a representative says that, this is getting in the way of unity, then we often attribute that to, the citizens who live where he represents, they must feel the same or something like that. And I know that's not necessarily true, but I think some people ascribe to that, certainly. So it would go a long way for our representatives to say that they are for unity, and to say and to have actions that show that they do have unity as far as making the rest of the country feel unified. And so it's true that citizens are ultimately the ones who provide the unity. I think the politicians can do more to foster that. Absolutely.
I 100% agree with that. I think instead of pushing off the COVID response until after March in order to make room on the calendar for an impeachment trial is definitely not working towards unity. I think if you look at the numbers in terms of the economic impact of the shutdowns, it's phenomenal. I mean, we're talking, from an education standpoint, a whole generation of kids are going to be lost. These kids that still can't in many communities do kindergarten or first grade are going to take years and years and years to catch up. And we were doing a good job with that before. So can we really make up a lot of ground? I don't think so. There's talk now of 10 million Californians being in some level of financial distress in terms of their housing. And I just find it unconscionable to do a partisan trial purely for political purposes when they should be working on that.
Okay. Do you have any other topics on this issue that you wanted to bring up?
No, I think, I agree with some of the points that you raised in terms of, we should not allow people to get away with things just because we shouldn't compromise on ideals just because of let's get along. I mean, that's kind of like an abusive relationship. Well, yeah, my wife beats me, but we're going to stay together for the kids, kind of thing. No, okay. I agree with you on that, but I just don't think that there's sufficient evidence for a crime, and the outcome, which can only be removing him from office and maybe prohibiting him from running again, although I think that would be litigated. He's already out of office, so we've already got the punishment. I mean, he lost. So it just seems kind of a meaningless political, like booing your rival when they leave the field after you've already beat them, kind of thing. And I just don't see any value to the republic to moving forward in doing that. I think it's just a poke in the eye at the 74 million people who did vote for him. And when I look at the numbers and the polling, I see 74 million people who voted for Trump. I see 80 million people who voted some against Trump and some for Biden, but certainly not 80 million who voted for Biden. There is no passionate. So I don't think giving a finger to those 74 million people is a way to start bringing us together. And this is what I said on why I was disappointed in the State of the Union. At the inaugural speech, he offered virtually no handout, no real olive branch to those 74 million people who feel lost, who feel left out, who feel, I've never been a fan of retributive politics. I don't think retribution is a good motivation for anything. We shouldn't base policies on retribution. We shouldn't base politics on retribution either.
Let me ask you this question. So the riot took place after the election, right? So I agree with you that 74 million people voted for Trump at the election. Anecdotal, this is pure anecdotal on my part. I've talked to a few conservatives who thought that, the riot was tragic and that Trump, played some part in it, maybe not criminal or whatever. So I can't say whether or not they would change their vote based on if we had another election, today, or if we polled people and we said, hey, now that the riot took place, does your opinion change about Trump? Where do you, maybe not your personal opinion, but where do you think that falls? Does Trump get 74 million votes today?
Well, hypotheticals are always difficult, but we do know that 30,000 Republicans have dropped out of the party nationally since the riots. I think that the storming of the Capitol. I think that's kind of a little bit media driven. There's this media narrative that Bush literally ordered the army to storm the Capitol to take it back, which is not the case. And I think those people who actually take the time to read the speech will come away with, well, that's not really what happened. And I do think that Trump missed an opportunity to solidify the good things that he did by graciously accepting the outcome of the election. I think had he done that, and had he really facilitated an energetic and enthusiastic transition, that he would have been in a much stronger position to run in the future, that 74 million would be a much higher number, in because then he would have eradicated this entire narrative of him trying to hold on to office. So I think he missed an enormous opportunity to do the right thing for the country and for himself and for the conservatives who stood with him. It's hard to do a hypothetical,
right?
And I do think the media has done an enormous disservice for not just 4 years, not just 12 years, but the golden age of journalism is done, and it is now very, very, very sensationalized, partisanized. Let's find our silo to make sure our advertising sells. And I would hope that as more and more people get frustrated, and I mean, trust levels for mainstream print media has fallen from the 60s, 70s, and 80s down into the teens now. I mean, there's very little trust in the mainstream print media, and there's never been a lot for TV media since the days of Cronkite and Mudd. That more people are going to start trying to look at original source material. And I think if anybody reads the speech, they're going to have a hard time saying, yeah, that was an incitement of a riot, because I just don't see it.
Okay.
And that might be a good thing. The more people look to find their own answers and less dependent on the media might be a positive thing for the country.
I think that'll be interesting at trial. I think the trial will be widely viewed. Experts from both sides will offer conflicting ideas, I'm sure. But I do hope that we do get a very detailed look at what, obviously it will mostly come down to what his words were in that speech, and to get some scholarly, lawyerly opinions about it will be very interesting to me.
I suspect it will be very highly watched. I think that if there is a defense, and I've heard some rumors that Republicans are simply going to leave the floor and that no defense is going to be offered.
I don't expect a defense to occur. Why would there be a defense?
Yeah, I mean, but I think if I mean, he has retained an attorney to present facts. I think the defense is going to be, this is what he said, and the prosecution, for lack of a better word, is going to be, this is what he meant, and that's going to be what the juxtapose is, what he said versus what he meant.
Right. So one last thing, I guess. So my understanding is that, yes, there's this impeachment process by you remove federal officials, remove them from office and potentially bar them, but there's still criminal charges that could be placed upon the president, right? He could still be charged criminally, federally, with incitement of riot, incitement of insurrection, incitement of sedition, things like that. I don't know whether there's evidence to support these things or not, but he could still be charged criminally for these things. So it actually goes beyond just an impeachment trial, right?
Yeah, and the interesting part about that is that there's a much higher threshold for demonstrating intent in that process, and it's much more clear in terms of what threshold you have to meet. The impeachment process is so nebulous that nobody really can say for sure how that process works, but we do know how the criminal process would work, and so that would be an interesting thing. If they bring charges and he's exonerated, that would be pretty telling in terms of how politicized this was. So they might not want to pursue it, certainly not through the AG's office, because if they exonerate him through that process, it tears apart their whole thing. Right now, if he's exonerated, or there's not enough, they don't reach the 60 vote threshold, they can say, oh, it was just partisan. But if they bring a criminal charge and it isn't sustained, then it makes them look like the partisan. So I actually don't expect they will pursue criminal.
Right. And the other thing to consider is civil right? And we both know that it's much looser, right, with civil, you know, some civil acts, civil lawsuits. So I'm sure that civil lawsuit can be brought by anybody, and so I'm sure he'll be exposed to quite a bit of that. Again, I just think how complex this is, and how many years down the road we'll be looking into this is pretty amazing to me.
Yeah, it's certainly one of the most regrettable instances in the Republic. It's not the first time the Capitol has been breached. Um, it's the first time it's gotten this much media attention, certainly the largest breach
right.
since 1812. But I'm hopeful that we are looking at a new chapter. I do find more and more people are kind of frustrated by the rancor and the constant San Francisco voting, while their schools are still closed, while student suicide rates are skyrocketing, they just voted to change the names of Lincoln High, Washington High, and Jefferson High. I think people are starting to get frustrated with sort of that level of, pettiness. Let's focus on what really is going to help somebody's life. Let's make our schools better instead of focusing on what their name is. Let's make our schools safer instead of focusing on, and I'm not really, I have to admit, I'm completely baffled by the Lincoln part. I don't know what Lincoln's great, terrible act was that he has to be erased from history is. But I think people are getting frustrated with that. And hopefully that voter frustration will start lending itself toward electing people who try to be more cooperative and less rhetorical and less hyperbolic. But we'll see. I mean, the most we can do as citizens is keep trying to bring people together.
Great. All right. That about wraps it up for today. Thanks, Tab, for engaging in this conversation, and hopefully we'll have many more in the future. Thank you so much.
And I think if anybody wants to participate in this, all they have to do is, let Better Angels know you get a partner and you want to discuss an issue that you can disagree on civilly. This would be a great opportunity for you to do so. It's very simple. Neither Erik or I did much preparation. At least I know I didn't. So you don't have to have a deep knowledge. You just have to share what you feel. Most of the stuff that I said was just what I feel. Most of what Erik said is just what he feels. So this is how we start bridging that divide: is people who have differing views coming together and having a civil dialogue.
Absolutely. I would say the same, encourage people to engage in, I think, a civil discourse. We very much demonstrated that, I think, today. So I appreciate your words, and we'll see you next time.
Thanks.